So I must admit that part of me is quite apprehensive because I'm about to share a very personal story with you. However, the other part of me has tremendous gratitude for being able to stand here before you and share my story at all, because my life could have been so very different. To start my talk, I want to echo the words of Australian author Bevan Lee. I am, two of the most powerful words, for what you put after them shapes your reality. Every single one of us here has our own story. What is that story? And what defining experiences have shaped your I am reality? It's these life experiences that have potential to teach us undeniably important lessons about the personal narratives that we create for ourselves. However, it's these same life experiences that can cause us to tailspin out of control by disempowering our stories and crushing our natural-born right to live a genuinely happy and fulfilled existence. In my own case, growing up gripped by the claws of depression and addiction in a dysfunctional family environment made it nearly impossible to experience the joy and fulfillment that every young person deserves. I often compare drug addiction and mental illness to a storm on the horizon, often hitting at arbitrary times, causing great turmoil. For those who experience this type of life, it can be a very painful existence that leaves you constantly asking yourself, why does life have to be like this? A question that I constantly asked myself while growing up. Based upon recent statistics, 20 to 25% of the general population has either a direct or indirect experience with mental illness and addiction. I am that statistic. And seeing as we have about 100 people in the audience here today, that means that 20 to 25 of you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I want to reflect on those numbers for a moment and ask, are you that statistic? Or is somebody you know living that statistic every day? For me, growing up in this type of environment not only made me feel as though I was damaged goods, but caused feelings of being cursed, and that it was just a matter of time before drug addiction and mental illness would sink its claws into me. My brother Kent, an amazingly gifted musician, died at 38 years old of an aneurysm which was brought on by years of drug abuse. My brother Chris, equally talented in his own ways, suffered from major depression that he told nobody about for most of his life. And just 3 short years ago, in 2014, he couldn't stand the suffering any longer and chose to commit suicide. As well, 2 other family members have had their ongoing issues with mental illness and alcoholism over the years. And although there's a certain heaviness that comes with discussing these things, this is really a story of empowerment. And today I want to share with you the 3 guiding principles that not only allowed me to thrive, but gave me strength to move forward throughout my life and to face challenge and adversity. Despite these disorders decimating more than half of my family, I am a survivor. And 2 questions that I constantly grappled with while growing up were, why is it that I never directly suffered from mental illness and addiction? And what is it within myself that allowed me to move forward in my life in ways that my other family members couldn't? It took my own brush with mortality 6 years ago to be able to answer these questions and to truly reframe the narrative that I had created for myself. And this near-death experience allowed me to finally understand that I was not defined by addiction and depression and a dysfunctional past, but more so by my ability to put guiding principles into action in my life that allowed me to be resilient and to persevere. I would not be standing here before you today had physical activity and sport not played such a critical role in my life while growing up. And it's this first guiding principle that not only provided me with an escape, but also gave me specific goals and a purpose worth pursuing. As well, it's physical activity and sport that is directly responsible for changing the neurochemistry of my brain. As an avid runner, I have always used running to think deeply and to reflect about my life and my work. Without question, running has given me health and happiness. But it's through running that I have had the courage to face some very difficult moments. When my brother Chris took his own life in 2014, I vividly remember the email that my sister sent me informing me of his death. There was no suicide note saying sorry or explaining his pain. There was only the belongings that he left behind. My wife and boys joined me on the trip back to Canada to attend his memorial service. And in the initial days after Chris's death, those dreaded, cursed feelings returned to my life with a vengeance, causing me to grapple with this overwhelming fear and sadness. However, on the day after returning to Canada, I chose to lace up my running shoes and go for a long run in the cold and snow. And my brother's apartment building was located about 1 kilometer from my wife's family's home. But on that morning, I couldn't bring myself to run past his building. So I chose to run in the opposite direction instead. And I ran hard and fast with thoughts such as, I am a failure as a brother, racing through my mind. I could have done more. I could have reached out to him and I could have prevented this from happening. I ran through tremendous guilt. I ran to grieve. I ran for solace. I ran through incredible frustration and anger that made me want to scream. And I ran in tears. And after several kilometers, I made the turn and I found myself heading directly back towards my brother's building because I knew that I had to say goodbye to him in my own way. And I soon found myself at the bottom of his apartment building, drenched in sweat, looking up at his balcony. And it was in this moment that I literally fell to my knees and was deeply grieving his loss. And I told him how sorry I was that he had to go through such torment and pain in his life. And I told him that my life led me away from his, and that I had to separate myself from his pain as an act of self-preservation, to not only look after myself, but to look after my beautiful family. In those moments, I prayed for an understanding of why these things kept happening in my life and to my family. But I made him a promise that I would live a fulfilled life in his honor. In the days and weeks following Chris's death, I thought about how I'd also run through the pain of my brother Kent's death 15 years earlier. At the time, while my wife and I were living in Hiroshima, Japan, my brother Kent had an aneurysm and was on life support for 3 days. It was literally 4 days before Christmas. All of the flights back to Canada were fully booked, so I couldn't be with I couldn't be with Kent in his final hours in the hospital. My sister informed me that there was no hope and that the family had decided to pull the plug from his life support machine. They wanted my blessing and consent, which of course I gave. In that moment, I didn't give in to feelings of being cursed, but instead laced up my running shoes and ran up the beautiful mountain that was behind our apartment. It took me almost 40 minutes to reach the top of the mountain, and as I would later find out, my brother Kent had survived for 33 minutes before being taken off, or after being taken off life support before taking his final breath. And in a moment of beautiful serenity and peace, I knew that I was saying goodbye to Kent on top of the mountain that morning. And when I reflected back on Kent's death, I realized that it was the first time that I had run to grieve and to face death and to say goodbye to somebody that I so dearly loved, just as I said goodbye to my brother Chris 15 years later in 2014. And in my life, I have learned that physical activity, exercise, and sport is not just about staying fit, but has served so many more purposes in my life. I am an avid runner, but was involved in team sport from adolescence right through to the day I graduated from university. I played competitive American football for 13 years, and it was through this experience that I was able to form life-lasting bonds with many of my teammates and coaches. Physical activity and sport, without question, has equipped me with my own suit of armor, which has always protected me against my genetic predisposition to addiction and mental illness that has claimed family members that I love. The research conclusively shows how our brain is flooded with endorphins and how neural connections are greatly strengthened through physical activity. Exercise matters as it reshapes our brains and leads to greater well-being. You do not have to be an athlete to embrace physical activity. You can garden, you can walk, you can run, do yoga, cycle, whatever it is. Regardless of how you choose to move your body, just know that it's the physical activity itself that causes profound shifts in your brain's neurochemistry. Not only did I reap the mental and physical benefits of exercise and sport, but in looking back at my own life, I realized that the second guiding principle that allowed me to thrive in ways that my brothers couldn't was that through physical activity and sport, I was able to connect with others. And it's this element of human connection that remains critically important to me to this day. And I have learned that every single person that we come across in life is present to teach us something about ourselves or the world in which we live. Regardless of who this person is or who these people are, it's this element of human connection that is critically important for our social and emotional well-being, as it provides us with a powerful support network in both good times and bad. And it's through human connection and having support networks in place that is directly responsible for my third guiding principle, that not only allowed me to find value within myself, but to also have important mentors in my life when I most needed them. And it's these people who gave me a sense of hope, who treated me with loving kindness, who taught me very valuable lessons about life and helped to guide me through some very difficult moments. And as I look out into the audience today, and after hearing all of these speeches and the 60-second mini TED Talks, I see so many amazingly gifted and innovative minds here who are striving to impact the world and make a difference through their work. You should all be very proud of yourself. But I would ask you in this moment to reflect on your own life and to truly think about the human connections that you have built throughout your life and the mentors that you have had that have helped to guide you and support you so that you can live the life that you do and do the work that you do. I feel so incredibly lucky to have identified what my three guiding principles are, because some people go through their entire lives without ever reflecting on the strengths and blessings that have allowed them to achieve happiness, joy, and success. But it took a near-death experience to give me this clarity and for me to understand what the guiding principles were that allowed me to move forward in my life. I was almost killed in May of 2011 in an accident in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. The ulnar artery in my left wrist was completely severed in the accident, along with all of the nerves, muscles, tendons, and ligaments. You can imagine the fear that I had in realizing how serious of an injury this was. I desperately tried to grab onto the injury with my opposite hand and hold my hand as high above my head as I could. All that I could think about at the time were my two boys, Eli and Ty, who were 5 and 7, and my beautiful wife, Neila, who's sitting right there. She's been my biggest support for 20 years. I guess I'm publicly professing my love for her in front of the cameras and all of you. But they were all that I could think about as I went in search for help, and with blood pouring down all over my head and body. It was a desperate situation, and I was rushed to a local medical facility that was ill-equipped to handle the situation. And due to the extent of the seriousness of the arterial injury, I needed a special surgeon. And seeing as we were in Cambodia, there was no surgeons that could be found. After what seemed like an eternity, this man, my guardian angel, entered my life. Dr. James Gulligley, a retired Scottish orthopedic surgeon who ran a charity that did volunteer surgeries on landmine victims and kids born with birth defects. How lucky was I? I was soon in an old ambulance that was weaving its way through the crowded streets of Phnom Penh, and although I was a bit hazy and foggy from the medication and the injury, I clearly remember the ambulance backing into his clinic, and I saw an old-looking dude with gray hair and a big bushy beard, and I can recall thinking to myself, oh my God, Santa Claus is going to save my life. Dr. James was able to perform the emergency surgery, and soon after that, I returned back to Canada for 3 months of intensive rehabilitation on my left hand. And although my left hand now only functions at 65 to 70% of what it once did, I am eternally grateful for this experience because it has made me into a better person. The lightning bolt-shaped scars on my wrist will be with me for life and will always remind me that this indeed was my greatest gift, because it allowed me to no longer run from a dysfunctional past and hide from it, but to surrender myself to it and learn from it. I no longer feel cursed, nor do I define myself by the mental illness and addiction that has destroyed family members I love. But instead, I choose to define myself by my ability to take action on the tools and strengths that I have worked so very, very hard to develop within myself. A much more empowering story to hold as my center point of reference in moving forward the rest of my life, and very important lessons to pass on to my 2 boys. As I stand here before you today, I am so very proud to say that I am a loving and kind father and husband. I am a passionate educator. I am strong in body, mind, and spirit, and I am eternally grateful for being able to share my story with you. This talk is dedicated to my brothers Kent and Chris, as well as anybody else who is suffering or has suffered from mental illness. May you find peace and happiness. Thank you, everybody, for your time and energy.